Hello, middle ed friends. How are you doing today? As I'm recording on Wednesday, it is sunny but cool. I will take it. I like the sunshine coming into the house. We are talking today about meeting the needs of students learning English. When I've taught this class in the past, I didn't used to do this, but I found that so many students had not taken any coursework or had this anywhere um, in their undergraduate or graduate course history. And so I wanted to make sure that I touch on this. I think it folds in well with what we're looking at in terms of students with special needs. And as we know, the landscape is changing. And so just areas in schools that said, oh, we don't have to worry about that. Having students who are learning English, they're going to be in the urban schools. That is changing vastly. And so we need to be prepared to help every single student who is entrusted to our charge. So that's what we will be looking at today. Before we get started, and I didn't have you read one of those chapters because I figured we could do the rundown here with some of these terms. ELL is the first one that I think is important to talk about. ELL stands for English Language Learner. And it recognizes that not all students, students who are learning English, they're going to be in all over the place. English is academic English. They're not just learning English like a tourist or to speak. They are trying to learn to be able to learn and communicate in academic English. And there's not just one standard definition. So what can determine these differences? Time in the U.S., formal language education in their L1, their first language, special needs. So we can have students who's twice exceptional. They are learning English and they have a special need. That's what's covered up here, etc. What's interesting is that for all of your disabilities or exceptionalities that you're studying, we say students with autism, students with attention disorders, students with emotional and behavioral disorders. We don't say our autistic students or our emotionally disturbed students. We don't say that. We say students with. That's a student first mentality, a student first orientation. That's how the world of special ed refers to students who are struggling with any of those exceptionalities. And it's really kind of permeated the way we talk about students to help us think about them as people first. I'm surprised that we haven't done that with ELL, because students is English language learners, not students who are learning English. So when I'm writing about this topic, I often say students learning English. I have heard ESL is English as a second language. That is limiting because most of the students, for instance, the students that I work with in New York City, many of them are English is the fourth or the fifth language they're learning. The students from Africa that I work with there have a first language that is probably their village language, and then a language of the country, a national language. And then beyond that, they learn French because French is spoken by neighboring countries as a national language. And then English we're going to pile that on as the fourth one. So English language learners, it doesn't confine it to ESL, but you'll see ESL a lot of places. That usually now just refers to the teacher, not students, because we can't assume it's their second language. I've heard students learning English as an additional language. So EAL, English as an additional language. I'm wondering if it's going to turn into students learning English or SLE at some point. So that we can say with a student first mentality. Anyway, that's just, who knows? It's I kind of like English as an additional language as well. But anyway, semantics, but it's important. It's important because the way we speak reflects what we believe. So I don't think it's just a silly thing and like roll your eyes about it, because I think the way we speak influences our heart. Our speech is supposed to be a reflection of our heart, but sometimes it can have the opposite relationship, which is nice. Okay, SIFE. This is students who meet at least one of these two following categories. So I'll let you read that slide as I talk about it. These are students who they come into your classroom and they may be 13, but they haven't had any schooling since maybe they were 10. Their instruction in their first language has been interrupted. And so they're in anything. So we can't even say they're 13, but they're not necessarily ready for seventh grade math because their instruction was interrupted. And so in most cases, those are, for example, at Skyline Middle School, students who are SIFE students, students with interrupted formal education, are in usually their sheltered instruction class, where their beginners program or their newcomers program. That's what it's called. And then they get as they catch up with their skills, they get mainstreamed and usually push in with a resource teacher. All right. So we have students who are in these situations. So we want to make sure the classroom is the best place for them. So we are going to do a little simulation. I want you to be ready to answer the following math problem in 2 minutes independently, no talking, and you can't use your calculator. So I'm going to put the problem up there, and then you can pause it and answer it in 2 minutes. It's going to be, well, you guys, you're math savvy. Okay, ready? Go. Okay, how'd you do? A little confusing? Thought it was going to be easy? Then what? Okay, so this is kind of this is how students who might be really good at math might feel seeing a story problem, a word problem written in English. You're like, I don't know what the impestio or whatever is. I don't speak any English. So here we say, oh, we'll help you, students learning English. We'll give you a definition. Okay, this doesn't help very much. Or we'll say, oh, visuals are important. Here's the visual. Okay, that is not very helpful because what is this about? I like this car, but I don't know. It's just very out of context. So instead, if I had said, oh, there again, we have our definition. Please solve, but I had given you a little bit of, I put the actual numbers instead of just the words in here and gave you some visuals and perhaps did some bolding. That's a little bit better. Using our knowledge of cognates, we could say porcentio. Oh, that sounds like percent. But what is this? Is it a discount? Is it tax? I don't know. So here we go. This is obviously a ripped off image, so pay no attention to that. This might be a better picture to go along with this key verb. And when I put it in context, underlining the word, okay, so Maria is going shopping and she's going to buy a green vestido. I bet it's this, a green dress for $200. She's going to buy a coat, probably a black coat for $50. That's a pretty good deal. And she's also going to buy some, zapatos. No, $200 down here. Sorry. And then an Embrigo this for $300. That's the coat. All right. This is a bad thing. So I'm not going to be sad about a discount. So it must be tax. So I have to pay 8% tax. Yikes. How much did Maria pay? Now I've got a shot. So solve. Probably would take you a lot less time to solve than it took when you had to do it this way. So what can we learn from this? Oops. We'll come back to that in a minute. What can we learn from this right here? But I want to do a little sidebar quickly. Psst. This is an example of an adapted task. So slides 6 through 8 are the befores, where there's no pictures, there's definitions in the language that they're learning, and there's a picture that's out of context. When we revamp it and do an adapted task, then we add pictures in context. We do some bolding. We have arrows. We give clues that would help us figure out what important words are. And that is an adapted task. So that's something that you can do similar to this in your teaching tool if you'd like. If you're doing an adapted set of directions, you wouldn't have to. But this is just an example of what I mean by an adapted task. All right. So getting back to the topic at hand, what we did when we added those pictures is that we added context. We embedded context. So BICS, that stands for Basic Interpersonal Communication Skills. And then CALP, that's cognitive academic language. This is the language that students are learning when they are learning English in school. So this develops first. Following directions, and there's context embedded into these to the interpersonal communication with context. So buying popcorn, where you can point to the popcorn, they can help you like sort out how much money. If you are having a face-to-face conversation, you can use gestures, getting an absence excuse, anything that where you can embed some context, or following directions like I just did with those pictures. Where there's no conversation, no context, is a telephone conversation, or a note that's on the refrigerator that the student puts there that the parent walks out and looks at and is like, I have no idea. Written instructions or directions without diagrams or illustrations. So basic interpersonal communication can be scaffolded with context or left unscaffolded. This is what we want to do for our students, is even in the basic interpersonal communication skills, embed some context. In academic, it becomes even more important that we do that in our cognitive academic language, that we embed context. So in science, doing a lot of demonstrations and experiments, a lot of audio and visual components in our lessons. The math computations aided with the stuff they might not know if it's a word problem. Plane geometry, projects rather than disconnected texts, etc. I don't know why social studies is here. It just says social studies. These are the things that students struggle the most with, is a lecture without illustration, a textbook without illustrations, explaining something new or abstract without any kind of visual or demonstration. So anytime we're building context, we're going to do better both for their interpersonal and for their academic skills. But what's important to remember is that this is going to, because most of this happens in their natural life, they're getting instruction, in quotation marks, in this even outside of the classroom. This is developing more quickly. So they learn this, the basic interpersonal skills, more quickly than they learn this. So when you hear something like this, I hear them talking to their friends in English just fine, but then they act like they can't write in English or do the work. I used to teach with colleagues who would say that, and it just made me crazy. Yeah, they can talk because they've been scaffolded in that in their everyday interactions like 24/7, and not with academic English. They are two different things. So do not say that. Remember that spoken and written language skills develop on different timelines, as do interpersonal and academic language skills. That's super, super important to remember. And I try to embed some context there to help you. And when they say this, we also know that is not okay, because we need to use visuals to provide context. So if they walk into your room and you've got verbal directions on the board and you're like, do it, and you haven't scaffolded them at all, then you have not given what they need to succeed. So vocabulary development is usually where people get the most focused when they have students who are learning English in their classroom. Most effective is teaching word learning strategies, connecting it to something they do know, giving them context clues, which would include visuals, selecting tier 2 words, so words you'll use over and over again in your classroom to teach, operations in math, the steps of the scientific method in science, anything that you're going to use throughout the year. What's not effective is copying definitions, writing sentences, memorizing definitions from a study sheets, and asking them to use context for unknown words when there's little contextual support, like that stupid picture of the two people looking at the car. That's not helpful, and yet most of the places you'll go, you'll see a lot of this happening. So things like this embed the context and honors the first language. So here's the English word variable. If they know their first language equivalent, they can write it there, and then words and pictures that help me understand and remember the meaning of that. And I've seen students with like a bunch of cards like this, like on a ring, or like sheets of this, that is these tier 2 words they would use often in science, or often in social studies, like economy, politics, things like that in social studies. Word walls. I saw these all over the place when I was doing my research on English language learners. So just really showing like visuals about how to do these things. This was in an English classroom. This is a social studies classroom. I love this one. This is like, you'd have to go up there and look at it, but talk about context. Like you actually see the different kinds of soils here. Things like this, it's going to help students who are learning English because it's giving them context. And as you're thinking about your exceptionality, I'm sure you can imagine students who have your exceptionality that would also benefit from this, maybe for different reasons, but they would still benefit from it. So what we have to ask before we teach something that's very content heavy is, what are the language demands? And then what do they have to know? And what helps can I give them to allow them to access it, like this word wall, or having them learn this ahead of time. This is something that's really important when writing. Probably when doing a lab report, you would need things like this, definitely in an English classroom. And so these are structure words I did not come up with them, but these are some logographic cues. If you look in chapter 5 of the Dubé-Hackett book, you'll see some examples of those. So here's some to help them remember what these mean. And then first language is scaffolding. In the majority of schools that I worked in, I went to New York City and worked with some of the international schools. My one requirement is that they had to have multiple language spoken. So it couldn't be that the teacher was giving instruction in Spanish because everybody was a Spanish speaker. So that really kind of narrowed down my schools. And I went to a lot of really cool high schools where there's like just languages that are spoken like in Harrisonburg. And one of the things they had in common is they let students speak or write in their L1 first and then translate. Get their ideas out in their first language first and then translate. A lot of them also did very strategic small group instruction. And so if you needed to pull a small group because language was an issue, you would do that and work with them to help give them the language supports. But if they were working independently, it made more sense to put students who are learning different languages together in a group. That way they had to rely on their materials, point to their materials that were supported with visuals, and really lean on each other and use English in the conversation. Like one student told me, if you put me with students if I speak Spanish and you put me with other students who in a small group who speak Spanish, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to speak Spanish. And like, I'd do the same thing. If I were in Spain and I got to be in a group with people who spoke English, I wouldn't be trying to use my Spanish there. I would be speaking English. So that's why mixed language groups for when they're supposed to be working collaboratively makes sense, but pulling like language groups for some small group instruction to help give them extra supports makes sense. I'm not going to get too into the weeds with this, but if your school is a WETA school, and Virginia is a WETA state, you have access to these materials. Again, Virginia is a WETA state. What is WETA, you may ask? Well, I don't know. This is what world-class instructional design and assessment, but it's like nobody even knows what that means. Nobody knows that. They have, if you've heard students referred to as their language level, like their 1s or their 6s, that's what they're referring to. They're referring to this WETA classification. So if they're a 1, they're just right at the very basic. 6 is that they've got some technical language, but 6 reaching, like there's always room to grow. So we're not saying they are completely fluent. It's comparable to proficient English pairs. So I want you to take a second and read the WETA can-do descriptors to differentiate blog. There's a link in Canvas. I didn't post it for you to read ahead of time because I wanted you to read it during this and walk through the examples. I've also posted the 6-8 can-do descriptors for you to consult as you read. So I'm going to give you, once you pause this and go ahead and read that. It's a follow-up to her 12 ways to support English language learners. So she'll refer to that. Same, Jennifer Gonzalez, Cult of Pedagogy. All right, welcome back from reading that. I want to show you the information you might get if you are at a school with students who are learning English. You might get a report. This is a report for, we don't have a student name, but this is an individual report. And we can see that they're at a 4.9 for listening, a 2.7 for speaking, a 4.4 for reading, and a 3.8 for writing. There's some descriptions of what that means down here. So what does that mean? You can kind of take this chart. This is what was posted for you for sixth grade, 6-8, and say listening, 4.9. Okay, let's hear 1, 2, 3, 4. So they're kind of like right here, like a 4 leaning on 5. That means that they can, Jesus is really hard to read, role play. They can read, they're better readers of fiction. They can identify illustrated main ideas. And so they can do all of those things that a 4 can do and some of the things that a 5 can do. For speaking 2.7, that's more along this line. So for this one, if you want to ask them simple everyday questions. You want to restate content-based facts. You're really kind of living in this area. They're kind of half and half. So they might be able to make predictions or hypotheses. They might be able to offer solutions to social conflict because there's some context embedded in that. And then for reading 4.4, we're back. Oh my gosh, there's some sirens out there. I think this is that when they come through and like greet the neighborhoods. Aw, so sweet. Hello. Sorry, I don't know how to pause this thing, so you get to listen to the sirens. Oh, it's so nice. The school buses. Oh, they've got school buses, they've got police cars, fire trucks. There was a red convertible. I don't know who that belongs to, but they were right in there. Okay, sorry, squirrel. So reading 4.4, that means they're like really here with aspects of this. And then for writing a 3.8, they're mostly a 4, but with a few things here. So that's what she was talking about. If they're at a 3, this is where we want to try to move them. So use what they do know to get them over here. You are most likely going to have an English language specialist. They're still called ESL for the teachers, ESL specialists who will help you with this. But these descriptors are available if you're ever stuck and you don't know what to do for a kid. If you have any concentration of students, you're going to have a specialist. If you have one student, then you might need to do a little bit of research on your own because that means your school has not yet fleshed this out and how to help. So I don't want you to get too stressed out about the WETA examples here, but know that it's here if you are stuck. You're like, I've got this one kid and I don't have anybody to help me. All right. So that is ELL. Working on your I gave you some examples of some scaffolding here today, some strategies here today. We'll talk about that in a minute. So let's now turn to your teaching tool. Again, you can you can make a video, you can do a Nearpod, you can do interactive slides, you can do a Prezi. Regardless of your form, your teaching tool should help us recognize this exceptionality in students, help us empathize with students who have this exceptionality, what it's like for them. Focus right here, how to support students with this exceptionality in the classroom, like a list of accommodations. And then give us a few ideas of how the needs of students learning English could be met at the same time, similar needs and accommodations. And then finally, an adapted task or set of instructions before and after, like I did with the math problem. I hope this makes a little more sense right now. And that goes into your presentation. The rubric will be posted in the module as well, so you can look at that. So pause, look at this, write down any questions you have. All right, next, the accommodations list. You're working with the members of your exceptionality group. You're going to have one Google Sheet per group. You're going to, as you have found accommodations, as you've been researching your exceptionality, you may have already added them. If not, that would be your next step. And then after studying your classmates' teaching tools next week, you'll add more accommodations to the sheet. And then by 4:30, you'll post your completed accommodations plan in the assignment on Canvas. You'll see it's a group assignment. It doesn't count as participation points. You're actually going to get feedback before you link in your management plan, but you're going to get 25 points for it. This is what you've seen already. I showed you this last week, but now we've learned, use visuals and icons, use word walls, use the first language as a scaffold, and be strategic about working in small groups and pairs. That works for, and I'm sorry you can't see that one, but there was an X there too. All of that, and then you might say, visuals and icons, that also helps me. That also helps me. Again, like word wall. So there's some other things to add to it if you would like. Gotten you started here with the ELL. So pause and see if you have any questions about the accommodations plan. Write those down so you can ask in our Zoom chat. If you want to, but you don't have to, you can look at the accommodations section, the very last section of your management plan, to see what's happening there. But you don't have to. I'm not going to go to it this time because last time I freaked you out. So let's worry about what you do need to have in mind for the next couple of days. In terms of your work collaboratively to create your teaching tool and submit this by noon on Thursday, April 23rd. That's a week from, that's next week's class, before next week's class. Continue adding to the accommodations list, which is going to be due on Thursday, April 30th. And then in terms of your classroom management, you can finalize items 8 through 9 in your classroom management plan, revise your interest task as directed. You should have feedback on that by the time we do our Zoom chat. And then you can begin drafting item 11 of your classroom management plan, but you don't have to. And then read and post. You're going to read the posted articles on co-teaching. The notes that you posted indicate your favorite 3 models and how, when you would use them. And you post that to the interactions Padlet. So instead of taking like important things notes or whatever, you're going to read those things about the models. And you'll say, I like this model and I would use it this way because of this, and I would use it this way. And I like this model because of this, and I would use it this way. And I like this model because of this, and I would use it this way. The only model I'm going to ask you to not talk about is one teach, one assist, because everybody's familiar with that. But there are other models to consider. So that is that. I don't think I have anything else. So I hope that this has been clear. I hope this has helped put your mind at ease about some of like the adapted task. But if it hasn't, make sure you've got those questions ready for me and fire away when I see them, when I see you soon. All right, have a good day, and I will see you soon.